You keep thinking the problem is your strategy. You keep telling yourself that if you could just find the right entry, the right confirmation, the right timing, then small accounts would finally stop disappearing. But the truth is much quieter than that. Small accounts don't get blown because the market is against you. They get blown because you are secretly demanding certainty from something that was never designed to give it to you. And once you truly understand that, not just intellectually but emotionally, something shifts inside you. The pressure drops, the urgency fades, the desperate need to be right loosens its grip. Right now, you probably approach each trade with an invisible expectation. You tell yourself you accept risk. You say you know anything can happen. But deep down, when you click that button, there's a quiet voice that says, this one should work. You feel it in your body. When price moves in your favor, there's relief. When it stalls, tension. When it moves against you, discomfort turns into disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen. That sentence is the root of so many blown accounts. Because when you believe a trade is supposed to work, you stop thinking in probabilities. You start thinking in guarantees. And guarantees don't exist here. Every single trade you take is one event in a long series of events. One, not the final verdict on your skill, not proof that you're talented or hopeless, not evidence that you've figured it out or that you're cursed. Just one event. But you don't treat it like one event. You treat it like it matters more than it does. You let it decide your mood, your confidence, your self-worth. You let one outcome control your behavior. And that's how small accounts die. Because when you expect certainty from a single trade, you react emotionally to random outcomes. Even if you have an edge, even if your approach works over time, any single result can still be a loss. That's not a flaw in the system. That's the nature of probability. If you flip a coin with a slight edge in your favor, you can still get 5 losses in a row, 10 losses in a row. It doesn't mean the edge disappeared. It doesn't mean you're unlucky. It doesn't mean you need to change everything. It means randomness is doing what randomness does. The market is not a straight line of cause and effect. It is a stream of uncertain outcomes, shaped by countless forces you cannot see and cannot control. And when you demand certainty from that stream, you suffer. You overleverage because you feel confident. You hesitate because you feel unsure. You move stops because you feel afraid. You close winners early because you feel relief. You let losers run because you feel hope. None of that has anything to do with your edge. It has everything to do with your relationship to uncertainty. Most traders are not losing because their strategy is broken. They're losing because they have not fully accepted that they cannot know what will happen next. They say they accept it, but they don't feel it. And until you feel it deeply, your behavior will betray you. When you finally accept that every trade is just one in a random distribution, something powerful happens. You stop trying to predict. You start managing. You stop trying to control outcomes. You start controlling yourself. And that's where consistency begins. Because blowing small accounts isn't about bad luck. It's about reacting emotionally to normal statistical variance. You have a small account. You take a trade. It loses. You feel pressure. You think, I need to make it back quickly. So you increase size. You force another trade. That one loses too. Now you're not thinking clearly. You're not seeing opportunities. You're seeing pain. And pain drives impulsive behavior. Before you realize what happened, the account is gone. Not because the market targeted you, but because you treated a single loss as something it was never meant to be. A loss is not an attack. It's not an insult. It's not a message. It's just part of the distribution. If your edge wins 60% of the time, that still means 40% of the time you lose. 40%. Nearly half. Are you emotionally prepared to experience that without flinching? That's the real question. Most traders are not. They want the 60% without emotionally preparing for the 40. They want the reward without embracing the uncertainty that comes with it. But you cannot separate the two. The edge and the uncertainty are inseparable. Once you understand that deeply, your behavior changes. You no longer see losses as interruptions. You see them as expected occurrences. You no longer feel the urge to get it back. You trust the process. But trusting the process is impossible if you're still secretly chasing certainty. And this is where the psychological traps begin to reveal themselves. Because even when you understand probability intellectually, your mind has habits that fight against it. You fear uncertainty, not because you're weak, but because your brain is wired to seek control. When you don't know what will happen, your mind searches for patterns. It tries to predict, it tries to find reassurance. That's why you overanalyze charts. That's why you look for one more confirmation. That's why you hesitate after a loss. Your mind is trying to protect you from discomfort. But in doing so, it sabotages you. Greed creeps in quietly. You catch a winning trade. It feels good. You start imagining what's possible. You increase size. You stop following your rules. You believe you've figured it out. That's overconfidence. Not confidence grounded in statistical reality, but emotional confidence fueled by recent success. And then the market reminds you that one outcome means nothing. The next trade loses. You feel confusion. How can this be wrong? It worked before because you were never guaranteed anything. You were just experiencing one point in a distribution. Denial is another trap. You see a trade going against you. Your plan says exit, but you hesitate. You tell yourself, it'll come back. You move your stop, you give it more room. Not because your edge changed, but because you cannot emotionally accept being wrong. You think avoiding the loss will protect your account, but it slowly destroys it. Hesitation is fear in disguise. You see your setup. Everything aligns, but your last trade was a loss. You remember the pain? You freeze. You skip the trade. That one wins. Now you feel regret. So the next time you jump in without waiting for your rules, that one loses. And the cycle continues. Attachment to outcomes is perhaps the most subtle trap. You don't just want to execute well. You want this trade to win. You want this week to be green. You want this month to prove something. You attach meaning to short-term results. And attachment creates emotional volatility. The more you care about the immediate outcome, the less objective you become. Objectivity requires emotional neutrality, and neutrality only comes when you truly accept uncertainty. When you stop demanding that any single trade validate you, so how do you shift? You start by observing your thoughts in real time. When you feel the urge to increase size after a win, you pause. When you feel the urge to revenge trade after a loss, you pause. When you feel hesitation because of fear, you pause. You ask yourself, am I acting based on probability or based on emotion? That simple question can save small accounts. Because small accounts are fragile, they don't have room for emotional swings. They require discipline, but discipline is not forcing yourself to act against your feelings. It's aligning your behavior with statistical truth. And statistical truth says this: you do not need to know what will happen next to make money. You only need an edge and the willingness to execute it consistently over time. That's it. Not prediction, not certainty, consistency. But consistency cannot exist without structure. And structure begins with clarity. You need written rules, not rules in your head. Written rules, clear conditions for entry, clear definitions of risk, clear exit criteria, not because writing them makes you smarter, but because clarity reduces emotional interference. When your rules are vague, your emotions fill the gaps. When your rules are precise, your emotions have less room to operate. You also need a reason deeper than money. If your only motivation is to grow a small account quickly, you will always feel pressure. Pressure leads to impatience. Impatience leads to oversized risk. Oversized risk leads to blown accounts. But if your reason is mastery, if your focus is becoming the kind of trader who can execute flawlessly regardless of outcome, then your relationship to each trade changes. You stop rushing, you stop forcing, you begin to respect the process. Daily routines matter more than you think. Reviewing your trades calmly. Recording not just the result, but your emotional state. Noticing patterns in your behavior. Did you follow your rules? Did you size correctly? Did you move stops? These questions shift your focus from outcome to process. Because the outcome is random. The process is within your control. And the more you focus on process, the less power random outcomes have over you. Mental discipline is not about being rigid. It's about being aligned. Aligned with probability. Aligned with risk. Aligned with long-term thinking. You don't blow small accounts because you lack knowledge. You blow them because you lack alignment. And alignment requires something deeper than strategy. It requires acceptance, acceptance of risk, real risk. not theoretical risk. When you enter a trade, can you genuinely accept the possibility that the money you risk may be gone? Not with tension, not with silent hope, but with calm acknowledgement. If you cannot, you are risking too much. True risk acceptance feels light. You place the trade, and you are emotionally unchanged. If it wins, fine. If it loses, fine, because you already accepted the loss before entering. Most traders never do that. They enter hoping it won't happen. And hope is not acceptance. Defining risk per trade is not just a math exercise. It is a psychological boundary. It tells your mind this is the maximum I am willing to lose on this idea. And once defined, it must be respected without exception. No widening stops, no doubling down, no emotional overrides. Position sizing is your shield. Small accounts tempt you to risk more. You think, it's small anyway. I need to grow it. But growth built on emotional risk is unstable. Consistent small risk builds durability. Durability builds confidence. Confidence grounded in discipline, not outcome. Scaling in and out must also reflect probability, not emotion. You don't add because you feel excited. You add because your plan allows it. You don't close early because you're afraid. You close according to predefined rules. Capital is not a scoreboard. It is inventory. It is ammunition for long-term probability play. When you treat it as something to protect emotionally, you become defensive. When you treat it as a tool, you become strategic. Once risk is fully accepted, something shifts again. Losses no longer feel personal. They become information. And information can be used. Every error you make contains insight. But only if you can look at it without judgment. Most traders review trades looking for validation. They want to prove they were right. Or they want to punish themselves for being wrong. Neither is useful. Instead, you review with curiosity. Did I follow my rules? Was this loss within expected variance? Or did I break structure? There is a difference between a losing trade and a trading mistake. A losing trade that followed your plan is success. A winning trade that violated your plan is dangerous. If you confuse outcome with quality, you will never grow. Random variance means even perfect execution can produce losses. Understanding this protects your confidence, because confidence should come from discipline, not short-term results. When you stop judging yourself harshly for normal losses, you free up mental energy, energy that can be used to refine, to improve, to adapt. Resilience is built not by avoiding drawdowns, but by surviving them without emotional collapse. Drawdowns are inevitable. Even strong edges experience them. If your risk per trade is controlled, drawdowns become manageable. If your risk is emotional, drawdowns become devastating. And here is where long-term sustainability emerges. You begin to see trading not as a battle to win daily, but as a practice. A repetition of objective actions over and over, day after day. You conserve mental energy. You avoid overtrading. You protect your focus. You accept that some days are flat, some weeks are slow, some months test your patience, but none of it shakes your foundation, because your foundation is not built on being right. It is built on executing with integrity. Operating in harmony with randomness means letting go of the illusion of control. You cannot control outcomes. You can control exposure. You can control behavior. You can control risk. That is enough. Over time, small, consistent actions compound. Not just financially, but psychologically, you become calmer, more stable, less reactive. You no longer feel the urge to double size after a win. You no longer feel panic after a loss. You simply execute. And that is when small accounts stop blowing. Not because you found the perfect strategy, but because you became the kind of trader who no longer needs certainty to act. You understand that probability is your ally. You accept that uncertainty is permanent. You respect risk without fear. You learn from errors without shame. You sustain discipline without exhaustion. And in doing so, you transform from someone chasing outcomes to someone mastering process, from someone reacting emotionally to someone acting deliberately, from someone blowing small accounts to someone building them patiently, quietly, consistently. That is who you become when you truly understand this. And once you become that trader, blowing small accounts is no longer part of your identity. It becomes a chapter you outgrew. Because the real shift was never in the market. It was in you. And when that shift truly settles inside you, something else begins to unfold. You stop measuring your progress by the size of your account. You start measuring it by the quality of your decisions. That sounds simple, but it changes everything. Because when you measure progress by money alone, you will always feel unstable. One good week and you feel powerful. One bad week and you feel broken. Your confidence rises and falls with every fluctuation. That emotional roller coaster is exhausting. And exhaustion leads to mistakes. But when you measure progress by execution, your foundation becomes solid. You can have a losing week and still feel proud. Why? Because you followed your plan. You respected your risk. You acted in alignment with your edge. That kind of pride is different. It's quiet. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't need the market to agree with you immediately. It is rooted in self-trust. And self-trust is what keeps small accounts alive. Most traders don't blow small accounts because of one catastrophic event. They blow them through emotional erosion, a little overleverage here, a little rule breaking there, a little revenge trade after a frustrating day. It's rarely dramatic. It's gradual, like a slow leak, and what causes that leak is not lack of intelligence. It's lack of emotional stability. When your emotions are unstable, your behavior becomes inconsistent. And inconsistency destroys probability. Remember this deeply. Your edge only works if you allow it to play out over a series of trades. If you interrupt the series with emotional decisions, you distort the distribution. You never give yourself a true chance to see the long-term result. It's like planting seeds and digging them up every 2 days to check if they're growing. You never let the process unfold. So the question becomes, can you allow the series to play out? Can you take 20 trades exactly as planned, regardless of short-term results? Can you remain the same emotionally after 5 losses in a row as you would after 5 wins? That is mastery, and it is rare, but it is trainable. You train it by reducing emotional stakes. If every trade feels like survival, you are risking too much. If every trade feels like validation, you are attaching too much meaning. If every trade feels like pressure, you are trading for the wrong reasons. Trading should feel neutral. Not boring, but neutral, calm. Like flipping a weighted coin where you know the math works over time. You don't scream at the coin. You don't beg it to land a certain way. You let it land. And you repeat the process. That repetition is where consistency is born. But repetition requires patience. And patience requires belief. Not belief that this next trade will win, but belief that the process works over time. When you truly believe in the process, you stop trying to accelerate it. You stop trying to force growth. You accept compounding as a slow, steady phenomenon. Small accounts tempt you to rush. They whisper, you need to grow fast. But fast growth built on emotional decisions collapses. Slow growth built on discipline survives. Survival is underrated. In this game, survival is power. Because if you survive long enough with consistency, the math eventually works in your favor. But you must still be there. And being there requires protecting not just your capital, but your mindset. Mental energy is limited. Every emotional spike drains it. Every argument with the market drains it. Every internal battle drains it. When you operate from acceptance, you conserve energy. You don't fight losses. You don't celebrate wins excessively. You stay balanced. That balance allows you to continue. And continuing is everything. There will be periods when nothing seems to work. You will question yourself. You will feel doubt. But doubt does not require reaction. It requires observation. You look at your data. You review your execution. If you followed your rules, you stay the course. If you didn't, you correct behavior. No drama, no identity crisis, just adjustment. That calm adjustment is the mark of a mature trader. Immature traders chase emotion. Mature traders chase alignment. The market is uncertain. It always will be. But you do not have to be uncertain within yourself. Your certainty comes from process, from knowing that you define risk before entry, from knowing that you accept that risk fully, from knowing that you will not override your structure because of temporary feelings. That internal stability is freedom. Freedom from revenge trading, freedom from panic closing, freedom from oversized bets, freedom from needing the market to prove you right. And once you experience that freedom, you realize something important. Blowing small accounts was never about money. It was about identity. You were trying to prove something to yourself to others, to the world. You wanted quick results to validate your ability. But real confidence does not come from quick wins. It comes from disciplined repetition. Over time, as you execute consistently, your relationship with uncertainty transforms. You stop seeing it as a threat. You see it as the environment in which your edge operates. Uncertainty is not the enemy. It is the space where probability lives. Without uncertainty, there would be no opportunity. Once that sinks in, fear softens. You begin to trust yourself more than the outcome. You trust that no matter what happens, you will respond according to plan. That trust is powerful because it removes the emotional swings that destroy small accounts. You begin to think in sequences, not single events. You see each trade as a tiny piece of a much larger picture. You understand that one loss cannot ruin you, but one emotional spiral can. So you protect your state of mind fiercely. You become selective, not just about trades, but about your thoughts. When you notice frustration rising, you step back. When you notice excitement pushing you to increase size, you pause. You realize that your job is not to predict perfectly. It is to manage yourself consistently. And the more consistently you manage yourself, the less dramatic trading feels. It becomes almost quiet, almost ordinary. And that's when you know you're evolving, because trading was never meant to be a thrill. It was meant to be a disciplined execution of probability. When you reach that place, you no longer fear small accounts. You respect them. You treat them as training grounds, as opportunities to refine behavior. You understand that if you cannot manage a small account with discipline, you will not manage a large one either. Size amplifies behavior. It does not fix it. So you focus on behavior now. You focus on consistency now. You focus on becoming the trader who does not need excitement, validation, or urgency. You focus on becoming steady, stable, grounded, and here's the quiet truth. Once you become that trader, growth becomes inevitable. Not immediate, not explosive, but inevitable, because you are no longer sabotaging yourself. You are no longer fighting randomness. You are cooperating with it. You are letting probability work. You are giving your edge room to breathe. And as weeks turn into months, something beautiful happens. Your equity curve begins to reflect your mindset, calmer, more structured, less chaotic. You no longer blow accounts, not because you are perfect, but because you are consistent. And consistency, when aligned with probability, is unstoppable over time. This is not about becoming fearless. It is about becoming accepting. Not about predicting better, but about reacting less. Not about chasing more, but about risking appropriately. When you understand this fully, deeply, emotionally, you stop trying to win every trade. You start trying to execute every trade well. You stop trying to grow fast. You start trying to grow right. You stop trying to avoid losses. You start trying to avoid emotional mistakes. And in that shift, small accounts stop disappearing. They start compounding quietly, patiently, under the guidance of a trader who finally understands that the real edge was never just on the chart. It was in the mind that chose how to respond to uncertainty. And when your mind is aligned with probability, when your behavior is aligned with discipline, when your risk is aligned with acceptance, there is nothing left to blow up, only something to build. And you build it one objective decision at a time. That is who you become. And that is why, once you truly understand this, you will never blow small accounts again. And even after all of that settles into you, there is still a deeper layer most traders never reach. Because understanding probability, accepting risk, and building discipline are powerful. But sustaining them over years requires something even more subtle. It requires emotional detachment from identity. As long as trading is tied to who you think you are, you will always be vulnerable. If winning makes you feel intelligent, then losing will make you feel inadequate. If profit makes you feel worthy, then drawdown will make you feel ashamed. And when shame enters the picture, discipline disappears. You start hiding from your data. You avoid reviewing your mistakes. You hesitate to take valid trades because you are protecting your ego. Small accounts do not survive ego. They survive humility. Humility does not mean doubting yourself. It means recognizing that you are participating in an uncertain environment where outcomes are never guaranteed. It means accepting that you can execute perfectly and still lose. It means accepting that you can make mistakes and still recover. When you detach your identity from results, your emotional swings flatten. You no longer feel inflated after wins. You no longer feel crushed after losses. You feel steady, and steadiness is the foundation of longevity. Longevity is what most traders underestimate. They think in weeks, maybe months, rarely years. But the true power of probability unfolds over long horizons. If you can remain consistent long enough, the math compounds in ways that feel almost unfair. But you cannot experience that compounding if you keep resetting your progress with emotional decisions. Think about how many times you have started over, blown an account, funded again, promised yourself it would be different, started strong, then slipped back into old habits. That cycle is not about strategy failure. It is about emotional relapse. Breaking that cycle requires awareness at the moment of temptation. The moment you feel the urge to break your rule, the moment you feel the desire to increase risk impulsively, the moment you feel frustration building, that is where transformation happens. Not after the blow up, not during the review, but in the split second before you act. If you can pause there, even for 5 seconds, you create space between emotion and behavior. And in that space, you regain control. Control not over the market, but over yourself. That is the only control that ever mattered. As you build this habit of pausing, something fascinating happens. Your confidence becomes quieter. It no longer needs constant reassurance. You stop checking your account every few minutes. You stop obsessing over every tick. You start trusting that your plan will unfold over time. Trust reduces anxiety. Reduced anxiety reduces impulsive behavior. Impulsive behavior is what destroys small accounts. So when anxiety decreases, survival increases. Drawdowns become less dramatic. You expect them. You prepare for them. You plan your risk so that even a series of losses cannot threaten your existence. That planning removes fear. And without fear, you do not need to react defensively. Defensive trading is subtle. It shows up as cutting winners too quickly. It shows up as avoiding valid trades after losses. It shows up as reducing size randomly because of emotional discomfort. None of those behaviors align with probability. They align with emotional protection. But emotional protection often comes at the cost of statistical advantage. When you operate from calm acceptance, you no longer need protection from normal variance. You understand that variance is built into the system. You accept that there will be stretches of frustration, but you also understand that frustration does not require action. It requires patience. Patience is not passive. It is active discipline. It is choosing not to interfere. It is choosing to let your edge express itself fully, and the longer you allow that expression, the more your results begin to reflect your structure. You begin to see consistency not as a lucky streak, but as a natural outcome of disciplined repetition. At this stage, trading feels different, not exciting, not dramatic, just clear. You see your setup. You define your risk. You execute. You accept whatever happens. You move on. No internal debate. No emotional storytelling. Just process. And this simplicity is powerful because simplicity reduces error. Complexity invites emotion. The more complicated your thinking becomes, the more room there is for doubt and fear. But when your framework is simple and structured, your mind stays calm. Calm minds make consistent decisions. Consistent decisions build steady equity. Steady equity builds trust. Trust builds patience. And patience sustains longevity. Eventually, you reach a place where blowing a small account feels almost impossible. Not because losses disappeared, but because your reactions changed. You no longer stack risk emotionally. You no longer chase recovery aggressively. You no longer treat each trade as urgent. Urgency was always the silent killer. It whispered that time was running out, that you needed to catch up, that you needed to prove something quickly. When urgency fades, discipline strengthens. You operate at a sustainable pace. You think in sequences. You think in years. You see yourself as a professional managing probabilities, not a gambler chasing outcomes. And with that identity shift, your actions align naturally. You don't need constant motivation. You don't need hype. You don't need external validation. Your validation comes from knowing you executed correctly. that internal validation is stable. External validation is volatile. When your confidence depends on the market, you are fragile. When your confidence depends on your discipline, you are resilient. Resilience is what carries you through inevitable storms. Markets change. Conditions shift. Edges evolve. But disciplined behavior adapts. Because disciplined traders review, adjust, refine without emotional collapse, they are flexible without being reactive, they are structured without being rigid, and that balance keeps them alive. As you continue on this path, something else becomes clear. Trading stops being about money entirely. Money becomes a byproduct. The real reward is psychological mastery, the ability to remain calm in uncertainty, the ability to accept risk without tension, the ability to detach from outcome without apathy. Those skills extend beyond trading. They shape how you handle challenges in life. You become less reactive, more thoughtful, more deliberate. Because you have trained yourself to operate in uncertainty without panic, that training is invaluable. And it started with one realization. You do not need certainty to succeed. You need consistency in the presence of uncertainty. Once that truth anchors itself deeply in you, small accounts are no longer fragile experiments. They are structured probability vehicles. You treat them with respect. You protect them with discipline. You grow them with patience. You do not try to impress anyone with rapid gains. You do not feel ashamed by slow growth. You understand that slow, steady compounding is powerful, and you are finally willing to allow time to work in your favor. That willingness is rare. Most traders burn out before reaching it. They exhaust themselves chasing certainty. But you, once you truly understand this, no longer chase. You execute, you accept, you repeat. And in that repetition, you become something different. Not someone who hopes, not someone who fears, not someone who reacts impulsively, but someone who operates in harmony with probability, someone who respects risk, someone who values process over outcome, someone who sees losses as part of the journey, not as threats, someone who understands that mastery is quiet. And when mastery becomes your focus, blowing small accounts becomes unnecessary because you are no longer trying to escape uncertainty. You are living comfortably inside it. And that comfort is the ultimate edge. Not a strategy, not a pattern, not a prediction, but a mindset, a steady, disciplined, accepting mindset that allows probability to unfold without interference. That is the transformation. That is the difference. And that is why, once you truly understand this at the deepest level, blowing small accounts is no longer something that happens to you. It is something you have outgrown, because you have outgrown the emotional behaviors that once made it possible. You have stepped into patience, into discipline, into acceptance. And from that place, growth is not forced. It is natural. And it continues quietly, consistently, as long as you choose to remain aligned with the truth that was always there. Uncertainty is permanent. Probability is powerful. And your job is simply to execute with integrity again and again until time does the rest